The day my stepmother threw me out of my father's house, she didn't even let me finish my tea. She stood in the kitchen doorway, holding a solicitor's letter in one hand and my father's old house keys in the other. "You've got until 6 o'clock, she said. I stared at her. Until 6 o'clock for what? She looked past me towards the hallway, where my father's photographs still hung on the walls. "To collect your things." For a few seconds, I genuinely thought I'd misunderstood her. "This is Dad's house." My stepmother gave a small, tired smile. "It was your father's house." She placed the keys on the worktop. "Now it belongs to Callum, her son." My stomach tightened. Callum had been living with us for less than a year. He was 32, nearly 4 years older than me, and somehow Elaine had always spoken about him as though he had been born into our family rather than married into it. I looked at the solicitor's letter. Dad left this house to me. The smile disappeared from her face. "No, Sophie, your father left instructions." That isn't the same thing. That sentence stayed with me, not because I understood it, because I didn't. My father had died 11 months earlier. Before he went into hospital for the last time, he had squeezed my hand and said something I hadn't thought about properly until that moment. "Whatever happens, sweetheart, don't let them make you leave." I had assumed he meant the hospital. I had been wrong. My stepmother picked up my empty teacup and carried it to the sink. "You've always had trouble accepting when things change." I looked around the kitchen. The blue curtains Dad had chosen. The little crack beside the back door he'd promised to repair. The photograph of us on the Welsh coast when I was 17. Everything I knew was still there, except my place in it. I packed one suitcase. That was all I could manage. At 5:43, I carried it through the front door. Callum was standing beside his car on the drive. He didn't look embarrassed. He looked pleased. And just before I walked away, he said something that made me stop. "You really should have asked Dad more questions while he was alive." I turned. "What questions?" He smiled. "About the house." Then he got into his car and drove away. I didn't understand what he meant until 3 weeks later, when a letter arrived from my father's solicitor. 3 weeks after leaving home, I was sleeping in a tiny rented room above a hairdresser in York. It was cold, cramped, and nothing like the house I'd grown up in, but it was mine. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. My father's photograph stood beside my bed, propped against a chipped mug. I couldn't bring myself to put it away. Every morning, I looked at his face and wondered whether he'd known what was coming, whether he'd understood what Elaine was planning, or whether he'd simply trusted the wrong person. The hardest part wasn't losing the house. It was losing the belief that my father had protected me. After Mom died, Dad had been the one person who never made me feel as though I had to earn my place. When he married Elaine, I was 24. She was charming at first. She brought flowers when she visited. She remembered my birthday. She called me darling in that soft, polished way some people use when they want you to believe they're already family. But things changed after Callum moved back from London. He'd lost his job, then his flat, then somehow every boundary in our house. His boxes appeared in the spare room. His clothes filled half the wardrobe. His motorbike appeared in Dad's garage. Once, I joked about it. "So is Callum planning to move in permanently?" Elaine didn't laugh. "He's family." I looked at Dad. He lowered his newspaper. "Let's not argue about this." That was Dad. He hated conflict. I didn't realize then how expensive that weakness would become. A month later, Callum started talking about the house as though it were already his. He discussed knocking down the wall between the dining room and lounge. He talked about turning Dad's study into an office. He even mentioned a conservatory. I confronted him. "You do realize this is Dad's house?" He smiled. "Yeah." Then he added, "For now." I thought he was being arrogant. I didn't know he was being confident, because apparently, while I was grieving my father, they had been preparing something behind my back, something involving a solicitor, something involving a document, and something my father had signed long before he died. Then, 3 weeks after I left, a letter arrived. Plain white envelope. My name, Whitmore and Bell Solicitors. My father's solicitor. My hands started shaking before I even opened it. Mrs. Patel was waiting for me at their Leeds office the following Monday. She led me into a small meeting room and placed a brown folder on the table. On the front, in my father's handwriting, were 4 words. For Sophie. When necessary. I couldn't move. That's his handwriting, I whispered. Mrs. Patel nodded. He left this with us several months before he died. Why didn't you give it to me? Because your father gave very specific instructions. She opened the folder. Inside were bank statements, correspondence, photographs, and several legal documents. Then she placed one final paper in front of me. Before you read this, she said, there's something you should understand. I looked up. Your father did not simply leave you the house. My throat tightened. Then what did he leave me? She pushed the document towards me. The legal ownership was changed shortly before his death. My heart sank. To Callum? No. She shook her head. Your stepmother never owned the property. I stared at her. Then how did she give it to him? She couldn't. My fingers went cold. I looked down at the document, and there it was. My name. Not as a witness. Not as a beneficiary. As the registered owner. When was this done? 8 months before your father died. 8 months. That was before his final hospital stay. Before Elaine started telling people Dad had changed his mind. Before I ever imagined I could lose my home. Why didn't Dad tell me? Mrs. Patel lowered her voice. He intended to. She opened another section of the folder. There was a handwritten letter. I knew the handwriting immediately. Sophie, if you're reading this, something has happened that I hoped you'd never have to deal with. I stopped reading for a moment. My eyes filled with tears. Then I continued. I need you to trust one thing. The house was never meant to be a reward. It was meant to be your home. My hand covered my mouth. Then I saw the next line. Elaine will tell you I changed my mind. My heart sank. Don't believe her. I looked at Mrs. Patel. She knew? Mrs. Patel nodded. She was informed that the transfer existed. Then why did she throw me out? Mrs. Patel was silent for a moment. Your father had concerns about what she might do if she discovered the full arrangement. I looked back at the document. There was something else, a date, and beneath it, a second instruction. If Elaine ever tries to remove Sophie from the house, contact her immediately. I felt sick. My stepmother hadn't made a mistake. She had done exactly what my father had warned me she might do, but there was still one question I couldn't answer. Why? Why had she been so desperate to get me out? I didn't call Elaine straight away. Instead, I called Callum. He didn't answer. Then, 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed. We need to talk. Alone, I nearly ignored the message. Then another appeared. Dad left something else. Elaine doesn't know I have it. We met in a quiet cafe near the station. Callum looked exhausted. For the first time since I'd known him, he didn't look like the confident man who had stood beside his car on the drive. He looked frightened. You knew about the deed, I said. He nodded. Then why did you help her throw me out? He stared into his coffee. Because I owed her. For what? He swallowed. Everything, then, he told me. 6 months before Dad died, Callum had been drowning in debt. Credit cards, loans, a failed business. People were demanding money he didn't have. Elaine had paid it all, but she hadn't done it out of kindness. She had made him a promise. Once Dad was gone, Callum would get the house. She told you the house was hers to give? She told me Dad had agreed, but you knew something was wrong. I suspected. I stared at him. So you let her throw me out. I was scared. You were scared? He looked at me. Yes, then he reached into his coat and placed a small envelope on the table. This is why I asked you to meet me. I recognized my father's handwriting. Callum pushed it towards me. Dad gave it to me 2 days before he went into hospital. I opened it. Inside was one sentence. If Elaine ever tries to remove Sophie from the house, give her this. My hands went cold. I looked at Callum. What is it? I never opened it. I unfolded the final page, and my father's handwriting made the world beneath my feet disappear. Sophie, the house isn't the secret. The reason I gave it to you is. I turned the page. There was a second document, and this time I recognized the signature at the bottom. Elaine's, dated 6 months before Dad's death. The document was a declaration. Elaine had borrowed a large sum of money from a private property investor, and she'd used Dad's house as security. There was just one problem. She didn't own it. She never had. My father discovered what she'd done, and when he realized she had put our home at risk, he transferred the property to me, quietly, legally, without telling her the full details. That was why she panicked when Dad died. That was why she suddenly needed Callum in the house. And that was why I had to disappear. She wasn't simply trying to give my father's house to her son. She was trying to convince the investor that Callum had control of the property. She needed me gone before anyone discovered the truth. I sat back in my chair. So Dad knew everything? Callum nodded. He found out before he went into hospital. And you? I found out afterwards. Why didn't you tell me? He looked ashamed. Because I was afraid she'd come after me for the money. I wanted to hate him. Part of me did. But looking at him across that table, I finally understood something. Elaine hadn't just controlled the house. She had controlled Callum with his fear, and she'd tried to control me with mine. I went back to Dad's house that afternoon. Elaine was waiting in the hallway, the same hallway where my suitcase had stood 3 weeks earlier. She looked at the folder in my hand, and all the color disappeared from her face. You found it. Yes, she closed her eyes. I was going to fix everything. You threw me out. I thought if you left, the investor would believe Callum was taking possession. You used me as a lie. Her eyes filled with tears. I was trying to protect my son. And Dad? She looked towards the staircase. He knew. That hurt, but then she whispered. He knew what I'd done. I took a breath, and he protected me from you. For the first time, Elaine looked genuinely broken. I loved him. I believe you. She looked surprised. But loving someone doesn't excuse what you did to them. Neither of us spoke. Then she said, "What happens now?" I looked around the hallway, at the photographs, at the staircase, at the front door, the door she'd made me walk through with one suitcase. I moved back in. Her face tightened. "You're throwing me out?" "No." I held her gaze. "I'm asking you to leave because this is my home." There was a difference, a very important one. I didn't shout. I didn't humiliate her. I didn't call the police. I simply opened the front door. And this time, I wasn't the one carrying a suitcase. 3 months later, the house was legally transferred into my name. I kept Dad's study exactly as it was. His books, his old leather chair, the brass clock that was always 5 minutes fast. But I changed one thing. I painted the kitchen walls the pale green Mom had loved before she died. And I kept the back door unlocked during the day because Dad once told me that a house wasn't meant to keep people out. It was meant to give the right people somewhere safe to come home to. Callum eventually paid back the money Elaine had used to clear his debts. It took him years. We're not close. We're not enemies either. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't mean inviting someone back into your life. Sometimes it simply means refusing to carry someone around inside your head. As for Elaine, I haven't spoken to her in nearly 2 years, and strangely, I don't hate her. I thought getting the house back would make me feel powerful. It didn't. It made me feel free. Because the deed didn't just prove that the house belonged to me, it proved something my stepmother had spent years trying to make me forget. I had never been the unwanted daughter. I had been the daughter my father had chosen to protect, and that is the difference. So if you've ever been pushed out of your own family, made to feel as though someone else's happiness mattered more than your own, remember this. Sometimes losing your place at their table is the moment you finally start building your own. I'm Sophie, and this was one of the hardest chapters of my life. You're watching Calm Family Secrets, where the quietest family stories sometimes hide the loudest truths. And before you go, I want to ask you something. If you discovered that your family had deliberately taken your inheritance from you, would you confront them immediately, or would you wait until you had every piece of proof? Tell me what you would do in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear that their worth was never decided by the people who rejected them. Subscribe to Calm Family Secrets. I'll see you in the next story.